everyone. Welcome back to the Geo Trip. Today, I'm very excited to share space with the remarkable Dr. Jazmin Scarlett. I mean, honestly, I am fan of geoing, geo-girling, whatever term you want to use a little bit, because I have admired her work for several years. Dr. Jazmin Scarlett is a historical and social volcanologist, researching how people lived in the past and present with active volcanoes. Her previous research has examined the people and volcanoes of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, Montserrat, Italy, and Germany. She's also interested in heritage studies, hazard analysis, disaster study concepts and theories, and science and communication, and also outreach pedagogy. And I always trip up on this word, so you're going to have to forgive me, and we're going to have to let Dr. Scarlett pronounce it properly because my Trini accent sometimes doesn't work. But as I was saying, Dr. Scarlett did her undergraduate in geography and natural hazards at Coventry University. That's where she got her Bachelor of Science with honors. And she pursued her Master's of Volcanology and Geologic Hazards at Lancaster University, followed up with her PhD in Earth Science at the University of Hull. Dr. Jazmin Scarlett has previously been a visiting researcher at Aarhus University in Denmark and a lecturer in physical geography at Newcastle University. While currently in between jobs, Dr. Scarlett is committed to being the EDI officer of the UK and Northern Ireland's Volcanic and Magmatic Studies Group. Dr. Jazmin Scarlett, welcome and thank you so much for being here. Before I pass the mic to you, I'd love to say a special hello to my partner in crime, Dr. Kyron, who is not with us today. Congratulations on becoming a new dad for the second time. Can't wait for you to come back to the Geo Trip. Dr. Scarlett, welcome. Where shall we begin?
Hello, thank you. Thank you for the welcome and congratulations on the baby.
So I'll poke you a little bit. When you come to this Geo Trip, we love to ask all our fellow colleagues to tell us a little bit about themselves, kind of their geo journey. What led you to become the geologist you are? So in your case, I would say a social volcanologist. And correct me if I'm wrong.
No, I would say that's accurate. So in high school, I did geography, and you learn there human geography topics and physical geography topics. And I was really engaged with the natural hazards topics. And then essentially that inspired me to do the undergrad at Coventry University. And this is definitely where it started, because that course was particularly special because it integrated human geography, physical geography, and disaster management. So I was not only learning the physical processes of how natural hazards works, including volcanic eruptions, but also then how that ties into the human geography, is like how they impact people. And then that ties into disaster management side and how you manage these hazards and how you keep people safe from them. And I also would like to attribute to my mum, because my mum is a trained social worker. So she's done sociology and child psychology. That's what she's trained in. So I think I attribute it to her as well, because the conversations we always had growing up about what the whole concept of social work is. And actually I've met people and worked with who do social work in disasters, and I just find that really fascinating. And it kind of just progressed from there. Just I really was interested in how people live with these hazards, because our Earth is becoming more hazards, particularly our climate related hazards because of climate change. And I'm just like, how do we as humans persist in such a violent Earth, essentially? And I just want to know and try and do my bit to help, really.
Oh my gosh, you have me chuckling a little bit because there's so much that you spoke about that just resonates with me. First of all, shout out to Mummy, because having strong women in our lives really does help with continuing our work in this field. But you talked about disasters and hazards, and I noticed that I didn't really hear you use the terminology natural disasters.
Oh.
No, of course, I'm going to ask you because I know that that's a particular term you are not a fan of. And so, do you care to explain to our audience members why you do not like the terminology natural disasters before we get deeper into your research?
Okay, it's because from the research I do, there's a school of thought that disasters are a social construct. And how I see that is essentially natural hazard processes, they are natural, they happen and they occur in a landscape. But it's because we as a society are in a way of those hazard processes and sometimes even manipulate those processes that turns those things into disasters. Essentially, when natural hazards processes interact with our social systems and our social systems are just not designed to cope with those hazards, and that in turn causes the disaster. But of course, most people do say it's natural disasters, particularly because of volcanic eruptions, because they don't think, well, you can't control a volcano. But it's like, well, you could control where you live and put things. And that essentially it's thinking that, well, if you didn't actually have anything in the way, would we be that concerned about it? And I actually, for children, when they're trying to explain this thing, I pick, there's a volcano in Antarctica. Do we really care about that volcano when it erupts? Not really, but we particularly care about a volcano if it erupts right on our doorsteps because it's impacting us. And that's just kind of the way I try to approach it, that disasters are not natural because we cause them essentially by being in the way.
Oh my gosh, that is such a good point and such a good school of thought. I mean, it's essentially part of the framework of my research. I'm looking at like geomorphic landforms or geomorphic processes and
Mm-hmm.
sedimentology, and
Mm-hmm.
how the communities actually been impacted, or community development has been impacted by these landforms. And I
Mm-hmm.
use that by studying, or I'm looking at and communicating with indigenous and Native American people, because
Mm-hmm.
in some of these areas, they're our first settlers. And
Yeah.
they actually thought about this. And this is what makes me so frustrated, right? Because a lot of classic scientists, they don't think about where placement is and processes and how that results in the disaster that we're seeing. And they
Yeah.
don't ask people who've lived these disasters, so
Yeah.
why did you not live at the base of a volcano? I mean, just common sense questions. So
Mm-hmm.
I love that framework. And I love to know, like, what kind of really pushed you to start thinking about it, because it's so not traditional when you talk to people
Mm.
who engage in this type of work, right? Or
Yeah.
who they tend to, or not even people, just like in general. And I'll use an example. So when La Soufrière erupted earlier this year in September, I heard so
Mm-hmm.
many members of the public saying, well, why are the people there? And they should know better.
Mm-hmm.
And I wanted to scream, like, that's not the point.
Yeah.
So can you talk a little bit more about some of the findings of your research and just some of the ideas behind it?
Yeah, so on that point that, well, why do they live there? It's actually down to colonialism, why there's people living there. And this is what I found in my research. So essentially, so St. Vincent and the Grenadines is one of the few islands that was in control of the French and British, and it was wrestled between the two colonial empires for a while. But when it eventually settled on the British kind of occupation, essentially what they did is they pushed the indigenous peoples closer to the volcano, because archaeological evidence has actually found that before European contact, the indigenous peoples lived on the coast and to the south of the volcano because they knew how dangerous it was. But because the colonists settled and they wanted to produce their sugar plantations, they pushed the indigenous peoples to the north, closer to La Soufrière. And essentially, they had no choice to live there and to live with the volcano. And this is shown throughout history that they were impacted by the eruptions. But if they weren't pushed there, then they would have been fine. Of course, probably different now because, how society develops and populations grow. But it's actually a very tied to historical reasons why they're in that location. In terms of other stuff I found, so part of my research was reconstructing the events from mainly qualitative data, so mainly written accounts in archives and also interviews, because when I was on the island in 2016, which seems like a lifetime ago, I interviewed people who who's still alive today from the 1979 eruption because it's still in living memory. And what I found interesting is that the volcano, it actually it does, the hazards it produces, they do go to similar locations. However, development has still happened regardless of that. So there's more people now living in the area just because of natural population growth. And that is just interesting to know that it's there in the written record and in the geological records that this volcano kind of, I wouldn't say it has like a pattern, but it definitely, it followed the same pathways in terms of where these hazards go and when they happen as well. Because the rainy season, of course, is a key factor into prolonging the hazards in terms of creating these volcanic mudflows, these lahars. And essentially that the island, unfortunately, has been made more vulnerable due to just, I mean, I could rant on for the whole hour, even though we haven't even got an hour, about how colonialism has messed up the island, but we won't do that. That could be for another time, maybe. But essentially, they're doing their best, basically. Like, no one died in 2021 eruption, no one died in 1979. So they are learning, and that means they are living with that volcano, which is one of the most dangerous in the Caribbean. But they're living with it. And I think that's something to celebrate in itself, that yes, this volcano is big and scary, but people can live with it.
I love that, because I feel like sometimes, especially people who are not familiar with volcanology and other disasters, they forget that on the positive side, you have to embrace how we figured out how to live with it, and when we have no fatalities. And I think that was a great testament to the handling of La Soufrière. I'm not going to get into any of the politics and say anyone did anything better or wrong, but I want to really acknowledge the role or the level of success they were able to have, because like you said, when you think about historical data, heritage, the role of colonialism and the role of socioeconomics, a lot of disasters could be a lot worse than they are what we're seeing present day. And so that kind of brings me to my next thing I wanted to talk to you about. So theoretically or technically, with what seems like the increased frequency of eruptions and earthquakes, and I just kind of want to sidebar and say, I only think it feels more frequent because of our age of social media and our connectivity. But for the average person, for what seems like the increased frequency of eruption and earthquakes, how do you think we can really help and protect the most at-risk communities, especially like in regions that are being frequently impacted or deemed economically vulnerable, or population concentration relatively high? Do you think we're doing enough as scientists?
As this is where it's the science, we're always constantly trying to improve our science, trying to figure out how the volcanoes work, and it's then how that science translates into policy, because at the end of the day, it's policy and how the society is as an entity, how that actually makes up the people that live with the volcano, because at the end of the day, it is these socioeconomic and like political and environmental issues that are tied to policy in terms of how people can cope with these things. So for example, let's say, for example, you are a religious minority. You may not have the same access to resources as people who are a religious majority, because maybe you're discriminated against. So you won't be able to get the same access to these things. And that, at the end of the day, the volcano is going to impact you either way. It's actually down to how, coming together as a community, as a society, and trying to diminish those discriminations and inequalities, because at the end of the day, like I said, it wasn't like, it's one of my main arguments, findings was that, for example, in the really historic eruptions for La Soufrière, racism doesn't stop when a volcanic eruption and disaster happens. So like these inequalities and discriminations, they still happen even when a disaster and the crisis is happening. So it's fast for a scientist to try and understand how these systems work, and then unfortunately it's up to the people in charge of policy to really see that actually is kind of like negative stuff in society that actually puts people vulnerable and makes them more at risk. So it will take everybody to try and live with them and deal with them. And of course, that's a huge undertaking because not everyone likes everybody.
I think that's going to be my new phrase going forward. Not everyone likes everybody. The end. Comes up now. But it's so funny because you literally are hitting the nail on the head and bringing us to the crux of a lot of topics, right? Some of the work that I'm doing right now is heavily geared to how we communicate science with those in the lived environments. And you kind of just said it. We need to learn, and we also need to communicate, and we need to, along with the science, take in the social aspects, which is a huge undertaking.
It is.
And so that brings me to my next question for you. As a social scientist, or specifically a social volcanologist, that means you do a lot of interdisciplinary work, a lot of collaboration. Do you think we are doing enough to learn and engage from impacted communities, especially in the aftermath of these disasters, regarding how they've coped, how they've managed, how they develop, even what emotional fears are associated, or if we're not doing enough, what do you think we can do better or should be doing better?
Yeah, I think it depends on the location. Some places have learned better than others. I can't think of anything at the top of my head, but it is up there that some places definitely learned the lessons from the past in terms of where they went wrong, and then they've improved. For example, communication is a very critical one when it's a crisis during a disaster. Communication between different authorities, stakeholders, and communities is very key. And it's tricky because we as scientists, we need more resources to try and do everything we need to do, which is impossible. Like me, I'm only one person. I cannot go around the entire island. Well, I can go around the entire island of St. Vincent because it's a tiny island, but I cannot speak to all the people because, volcanic eruptions, they are big, but they're very local, but they impact almost everybody. So literally the entire population of St. Vincent was impacted by that eruption one way or another, even if they weren't in the red zone, the closest to the volcano. So we just need to really understand more and then work with communities more to try and find out what their needs are, because at the end of the day, they're the ones that are being impacted. So we need to try and focus on their needs more, I think.
Man, what a great answer. You now have me thinking about eruptions or past eruptions that occurred in Montserrat and Mount St. Helena in the US versus recent eruptions in Kilauea and La Palma and St. Vincent, and just the difference of the response that's happened, the communications and the development, right? And you have me thinking about land versus economics versus community. Because in with the Mount St. Helena eruption, when the last deadly eruption that they had, they extended the buffer zone. You cannot build a house anywhere in this proximity. And you think about Montserrat, where unless you're currently a scientist, you cannot go to that particular part of the island. How many people were displaced? And then you think about like Kilauea, La Palma, and you see how they've learned. So more recent eruptions that are happening, not to sound insensitive, but from a scientific and a geologic standpoint, they're fascinating, but people are okay. And that really brings me to thinking about support and what support looks like post these disasters, and what it looks like depending on what group you are. And we'll kind of like narrow back into St. Vincent because I know we both have Caribbean legacy. So let's just kind of use that for an example. They had an eruption, and they had an eruption in the middle of a pandemic, and there were different implications. And you think about the different groups, and you wonder about how could we have gotten support better in terms of considering the different groups, and is that practical in disaster management?
it is practical if we have the resources to do it. So, for example, you will need a team of social scientists or people that know how to do like interviews or focus groups or not to actually go and have the money to go and do that, because that is a huge undertaking to collect that data and then to analyze the data and then to interpret that data and then to write up that data in a way that's accessible to, for example, on St. Vincent, it's the National Emergency Management Organization, who will need that to know how to like, right, who do we target in terms of the shelters we put up, or what we put in the shelters, or what particular disaster relief do we need to target and stuff like that. So we can only do it if we have the resources to, and that's definitely a problem, because of course it is down to who gets the funding, and we're in a constant state of competition to get the funding. I mean, at one point I did want to try and get some funding to do some research on what, as the eruption was kind of like building up to the explosive activity in April earlier this year. But I just couldn't, because one thing, I am in between jobs, so my chances are not as great, because I need to find that support and then get that support from the institution who has not hired me, and it's just faff. It's just a hassle. And on our end as scientists, that's the key barrier, I think it is. It's getting that funding and then getting that research that is, it is culturally sensitive, it is, ethical, it does consider all parameters, and they do find meaningful ways to help these communities at risk, because you don't want to be at risk of seen as doing the parachute science thing, which is, you're a researcher from the outside, you go in, collect data, then just leave, and like, that's it. You want to move away from that, because that is a colonial kind of like way of doing geoscience. And of course, we don't want to do that anymore, because that's not right. Because at the end of the day, sure, we can collect all the data, but I'm in the UK, like, it doesn't matter to me. It matters more to the people at St. Vincent, because they're the ones living with it, So yeah, I think we just need to have more money.
I love that it boils down to money, the bottom line. But in your explanation, you just, oh my gosh, Dr. Scarlett, like, I don't even know where to go, because you just like alluded to so many great points. So I kind of actually want to transition a little bit as you talk about support and what support looks like, especially for early career scientists in between jobs. But I also want to quickly touch on that emphasis of the need for, when we think about scientists and we think about response and we think about management, the importance of social scientists and funding and what that looks like for these areas. And I'm looking at the clock and I'm like, where do we go? Do you mind if we put a pin in the technical and look at and have the discussion about support and talk about support in the sense post-graduation, job search, in between job search, and what that looks like?
Yeah. So I was fortunate enough to so my PhD was from 2014 to 2020 was officially when I got my certificate, but I did actually pass my Viva in 2018, just because logistics and stuff like that. But I was fortunate enough in that time to actually be a visiting researcher to Denmark, so I had a little extra bit of research to do, which was, forming a paper, which of course papers is what you need in academia to get kind of anything. I also was fortunate to become a teaching fellow in physical geography, and then that title changed to lecturer. So I was being paid to do that, as well as while I was tidying up the ends of my PhD. But then it was down to the pandemic, really, why I no longer had that teaching role. And it's just tricky because, particularly in the UK, the academia job market is not great. And that was before the pandemic. Now in the pandemic, it's even tougher, mainly because, just institutions are just tying up their money and trying to not, well, I wouldn't say wasting money, but they don't want to spend it that much in terms of giving people reliable contracts. So there's quite a lot of lecturers that are on short-term temporary contracts and not that many on permanent open-ended tenure contracts, mainly because it's a money issue, which doesn't make sense because, okay, this is probably going to get political, but like institutions, they do have money, but they just don't, what their spending habits are very strange. But I digress. So
Sounds familiar.
For me, it's been just so I managed to get kind of like odd jobs in between the time we have been in this pandemic. I did manage to get 2 jobs that last 6 months that did actually give me quite a bit of money that I can just kind of just like give me time to like give a breather and to not like be hard pressed on finding jobs. Good, because then I actually can focus on writing papers because I have applied for many like academic like postdoc positions and lectureship positions, and one of the key things it says that you need more publications. So now I'm like, well, okay then, I'll give you more publications. And that's the thing, like I've been getting interviews and stuff like that, but not only down to publications, it's just usually the person who was successful, they just had a little bit more experience, which is, you fall into that trap there. Well, like I need this job to get the experience so I can get the experience, but how can I if I don't have the experience? And it's like it has been tough, and my resilience has been worn down a bit, and my morale and like my self-esteem has been knocked. But I think if you can just try and slow down and prioritize your mental health, because it is tough to just be rejected again and again and again, in my case anyway. So that's why I'm just taking it easy. Just if there's an application I think is worthwhile that I might have any kind of chance, then yeah, I'll do it. If not, like I'm not going to lose sleep over it, because in the UK it's really tough at the moment, and now I am looking elsewhere because I'm not going to cover it in this, but UK academia is not great at the moment.
Oh my goodness. Especially if you follow academia on Twitter, it feels like there's a dumpster fire every day.
Yeah.
But I do I do love some of the points that you brought up. I mean, I love all of the points that you brought up, but especially when it comes to mental health and safeguarding your space, because I think one of the lessons that I've definitely learned as a PhD researcher and as a PhD researcher who intends to graduate with her doctorate is that you have to learn how to define and how to survive failure for yourself. And you have to be careful of what metrics you use to measure your success, because the classical metrics don't take into account a lot of what has changed socially, mentally, and financially. And so that kind of brings me to you talked about resilience and the impact on resilience. And I'd love to touch a little bit on what's keeping you motivated and powered on despite it all, because I mean, I know you're passionate about this topic, but there's only so far passion can really carry you, if we're being truthful. So what are some of the tips you found?
So take this one with a pinch of salt, but spite has been great. Just I've just been like, you know what, screw it, I'm doing this out of spite.
Okay, so spite is number one. It's like Caribbean bad mind. Bad mind drives me.
Yeah. I mean, it doesn't work for everybody, but that's what's keeping me going. Another one is just that, well, like for me, I've got my doctorate. I've done all the research because I want to help people. So I'm just like, well, I'm going to keep going because there are people out there that might actually benefit from the research I'm doing. I mean, my PhD thesis, it's very strange. I gave the thesis to the Seismic Research Center who in Trinidad, who monitor La Sofra. I gave them that thesis a few months before the volcanic eruption started. and it like they said that thank you, that has been helpful, and that's great. That's a great feeling that actually I've helped. And I'm hoping once things have calmed down, and one day if I get any money, I would love to keep going and keep helping St. Vincent, because of course that's where my family's from. And so that's another thing. So just because I want to help people, my support network, so my family and friends, they have been really supportive and helpful as well, and they keep me going. Either just just give me time out and just we do something silly, or just watch a movie or something. I live with my dad, so just hang out with my dad is enough. And just keeping his spirits up that way. Other people in the support network, they have been forwarding me on job adverts, be oh, this could be something you could go for, sort of thing. So people just looking out for jobs for me on my behalf, because I have said, look, I'm really tired and applying for stuff, but if you are okay if you do send me stuff, and I can see if I feel like I have the energy to do it. Also, I would say just try to find ways to keep your skills up, in particular your writing skills, if of course that's kind of what you want to do. So for example, I tried and failed to improve my coding skills. I'm currently on a workshop to improve my QGIS skills, so mapping skills. Of course I am writing, so just keep my writing skills up. I suppose, yeah, just find ways to keep yourself busy, because me in particular, if I don't do anything, I get so bored. And when I get so bored, I'm unbearable to be around when I'm bored. So it's always good to keep me entertained somehow.
I love the honesty. And just to kind of wrap everything into a nice little bow regarding staying busy while doing good work and doing things that are different. Can you tell our audience a little bit about your volcanologist meets gamer side? Because that I remember that being one of my earliest introductions to you, and I was just like, this is so dope.
Okay, yeah. So it's no secret that I do like video games. And essentially about a couple of years ago, 3 years ago now, I got more interested in looking at volcanic landscapes and volcanoes in general in video games. And mainly saying, do they look right? Do they translate to what we see in real life or not? So it's turned, I started blogging about them on my blog. And then a friend of mine was reading my blogs, and he was like, so he's a gamer as well, and he's like, oh, that's really cool, can I do one? I was like, yeah, go ahead. So he's done a few, and then because we're both volcanologists and we like games, we were just like, shall we just present this at a conference and see what happens? So we made a poster, conference poster. We took that poster, and we also took our Nintendo Switches along. And essentially we put up the poster, we introduced the poster and be like, hey, we got one of the games we talked about right here to play with. So it was rather funny, academics, even senior academics that probably have never touched a video console in 30 years or something, even they were having a go and exploring around after we told them how the controls work and whatnot. And just we've got positive feedback from that experience, and people were essentially like, you should write this up as a paper, it's be really cool. So we did. What we did is we split it into kind of the paper we did, we kind of intertwined it with how accurate or inaccurate do a certain number of video games volcanoes look like and their hazards, what is absent, what is there. We also then looked at pedagogy side, so how this can be used in the classroom and for outreach, because for example, like we took on Nintendo Switches, they're very portable kind of consoles you could take around. There's quite a few games that have volcanoes in them that you can get people to actually play around with. So we're thinking, how can we actually use video games that have already been designed, because there's lots of work being done by geoscientists who actually create their own games, to bring that educational bit into it, more at the forefront. But for us, we're like, well, let's take popular video games that are not designed to educate, they're there to entertain. But from our experiences growing up as gamers, we have learned useless bits of information from video games. So like, well, we know that people can learn from video games because we have learned useless information from them. So how about we focus on the volcanoes and what you can learn from that?
Oh my goodness, that is so wonderful. I love how you're able to cross over or integrate your scientific and your
Mm-hmm.
creative side. I mean, that's something that I tell all early career geoscientists that I speak to, like, do not be afraid to be dynamic. Do not be afraid to show up as your whole self, because that was something I was so afraid of for a while. And I
Mm-hmm.
realized that's what makes me unique as a scientist, being
Mm.
able to straddle these both worlds. I mean, Jazmin, this has been such a great conversation, and I want to be cognizant of your time and our audience members' times. So I'm going to kind of bring it to a close. Before I do that, we of course have to do a little critical session we like to do here on the Geo Trip, referred to as Hot Potato, where I ask you 5 quick questions. You tell me first thing that comes to your mind,
Mm.
and then and then we kind of close up with you letting our audience know where they can follow you on your socials or find some of the amazing work that you're doing. So, Hot Potato, are you ready?
No, but go.
I love it. So if you woke up tomorrow as a video game character, what character would you be?
I've got Link.
Nice. What 3 songs describe you best as a volcanologist?
So was that what 3 songs best describe me? Was that
Yes, ma'am. If you had a
okay?
soundtrack.
Oh gosh, if I had a soundtrack, I love well, What Is Love by Hadaway. I love playing that song. There's a song called oh gosh. I've forgotten games or forgotten songs. What are songs? You know when you just like you know the beat, like the beat of it and lyrics, but you forget the title of the song.
Oh, that's me all the time.
I'm sorry. Can I look? I'm sorry. I'm
Of course
sorry.
you can Google.
Okay, there's a song called Banana by A Tribe Called Red. It's a very upbeat song. It's a very dancey song. I'm basically a very upbeat person. And then there's also Todrick Hall, I would say, and Amen.
Nice. I love how the hot potato was like your hardest question for the whole interview.
Yeah, it is.
We only have 3 more to go. Don't worry. My next question, excluding La Soufrière, if you were told you could only work on one volcano and live next to it for the rest of your life, what would it be?
Oh my gosh, that's a horrible question. Oh no. No, there's so many volcanoes that oh no. Oh no. For the
I told you this is like the critical session.
No, I don't. Okay, let me think. What? You know what? I'm gonna say Mount Etna in Sicily, Italy.
Nice. A little bit of fermented grapes with your volcano. I like it. Question number 4. What's the last thing you binged?
Last thing I binged. It's a video game. I've been binging Kingdom Hearts series. So there's like 7 games. I've been playing them all.
Okay, now I'm gonna have to look into this. I actually don't know that one. I'm a FIFA player. That's as far as I get.
See, for me, I don't actually watch much. I just game more instead.
And that is totally fair because you can't do both. There's not enough hours in the day. Last but not least, here's an easy one. You're hosting a dinner. Who would be your 3 guests? Anyone dead or alive, and the audience doesn't necessarily have to know them.
Oh gosh. Okay. Oh no. Okay. It would be, I would really love to have a conversation with a Black British MP over here called Diana Abbott. She's the first British Black MP elected to the Labour Party, and just her journey just seems so fascinating. So I would love to just talk with her over dinner, just how she's managed to cope being a politician in this country. I would also like to speak, have my great grandmother, no, my great great grandmother, Oriel, who she was a Vincentian, and I would love her there because she was a child when the 1902 eruption of La Soufrière happened, and that was a deadly eruption. It killed over 1,000 people, but she survived it, and I'm just like, how? And just her life in general would be really fascinating, because she unfortunately passed away a few years ago, but she was like almost 100 years old. So I'd be like, what a life to have. She was in Vancouver when she died. So I think I would love to have her there just to know what it was like to grow up in the 1900s. And also, who else? What's his name? Oh, the name's escaped me. Oh, that's really frustrating. No, it's gone. It's gone. This is so hard. It just put me so hard. No, I had it, but it's gone. It's gonna bother me now. Okay, replacement. Oh, who are people? I don't know who people are.
If I could get a game character, this would be so much easier.
No. I want it to be actual people. No, there's Marsha P. Johnson, who was one of the trans activists who was involved in Stonewall riots, I think. Just because she was for one thing, she helped start a riot that really propelled LGBTQ plus rights. And just her life. I would just, I just really love hearing people's stories and their life stories. So I think Marsha would have had one hell of a story to tell.
Wow, thank you. Dr. Jazmin Scarlett, you have told one hell of a story today. So thank you so much for coming on the Geo Trip. It has been an absolute pleasure. Can you or would you like to share with our audience members ways they can contact you, or a title of your publication that they can follow your work, or anything that you're comfortable with as we close off today?
Okay, I suppose best place is to find me on Twitter, which is @Scarlett_Jazmin. That's probably the best place because I don't shut up on there, so that's probably the best place to find me. But the video game paper I talked about, I don't actually, it's quite a long title and I've forgotten it.
Well, definitely, if our audience members were to follow you on Twitter at SCARLET_JAZMIN, they will find the link to your blog and some of your papers. And of course, I myself retweet a lot, and I see a lot of your work being shared, so they can probably link from there. But yes. Oh my gosh, thank you so much for joining us. It was amazing.
No problem. Thank you for having me.